brother just told me. Jay, why are we laughing so much? How many years, John?
I started teaching Hamlet when Lyndon Johnson was president.
And she says, I met the youthful Lord Paris at Lawrence's cell and gave him what becoming love I might, not overstepping the bounds of modesty.
No, I already did that with the other
I should
guy.
say not.
Him and Beowulf and...
But you know, when he dies, he's like desperate to be remembered. Tell my story. Remember me.
Should we be doing this? Should we stop right now?
No.
All right. Hey, Jay, we're back. Teacher Talk with Paul and Jay. How are you doing this evening?
I am great. I am a few weeks into the school year, and I have really good kids. I'm very lucky. I have freshmen and seniors.
Really? You got a decent groups?
Really nice. Both the freshmen and seniors are just really nice guys. So I'm very lucky. Yeah, very lucky.
How do you feel about your students as readers this year? I've been kind of overwhelmed by mine, but what's yours? What do you think? Are they reading?
My freshmen, I do some study skills early on, how to take notes, how to ask for help, just general study tips about time management. And then the first 3 books we read are young adult fiction books to develop their reading fluency and confidence. And then we dip into some more difficult stuff after that. So we're only about 80 pages into our first book because we did some other stuff plus the summer reading. So I don't have a read yet. The 2 quizzes they've taken have been really good. So I think they're very earnest and they're trying really hard. Seniors start with the summer reading book and then Beowulf, which is less about lots of a page count and more about close reading. So that's the weird thing, right, about doing British literature chronologically is you don't have serious page counts really till the 18th, 19th century. So
completely.
It's kind of weird. It's kind of interesting. What you do get is how do people, like when you're doing something like Beowulf or the Odyssey, how do people manage difficult, old, distant text? Not so much how do people manage reading for a long time. I don't think either of us would give a large block of pages to be read quickly with these books to kids. So I think it's more about how do you manage difficulty and like the sort of difficulty that's not like Toni Morrison difficulty, which is very real, but more difficulty in terms of you're separated 3,000 years or in the case of Beowulf, 1,200-ish years. So
where they're asking, what's my buy-in here? Why am I reading this besides just something kind of a little bit violent and maybe interesting on the surface? You're right. It's totally different with the British Lit. It's tough, which I do, basically chronologically. I tell them we're going to take 300-year strides through British Lit history. You kind of do. Beowulf, Gawain, Shakespeare, and then, Arthur Conan Doyle or something, and that's, those are roughly 300 year differences. But in my other American Lit classes, which are most of my classes this year, I'm just overwhelmed with this fact. And we had parent teacher night and I was telling parents this over and over. I'm thinking about just throwing everything out and just stacking up a big pile of books. And every day it's just like reading daycare. Just come in, sit down in the room, get out a book after putting everything else away, phones hung on the wall, and read. Like I'm just overwhelmed with this thing. It's like a vision, or like a calling. I feel like I've had that these students have got to read. It would vastly. I mean, we, parents, adults always say that, but it just feels like that so much that kids just aren't reading. When they do read, it's just a lot of notes online of various things. So I don't know. I think I am going to do some version of that. I have to do some other things, but I just feel like pushing them through pages and just push, and just have a 3,000 page year or something like that, even name it and just stack them up. It's a little bit of a blunt instrument, but my gosh, to build that muscle, to have that experience. I don't know. We'll see what happens, but that's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking for my kids.
Nice.
Yeah. But anyway, we're here to talk about classroom, yes, but specifically the Odyssey. And we are slowly but surely making our way through this. Jay, I think you commented we might be truly enacting the Odyssey and take 20 years, go full method. And full method take on the Odyssey.
The level of our commitment, I just want to say. That's how
Daniel Day-Lewis has nothing on us,
We're the Daniel Day-Lewis of podcasts. I have to say, the other day, I think I referenced, I said to my freshman, we're at the Bon Jovi stage of the novel. And a kid looks up and he smiled and he goes, oh, halfway there, living on a prayer. Now, my freshmen were born in what, 2000?
Yeah.
No, 2010.
Yeah, 2010.
Yeah. So that song came out in like 86 and he knew it. And I just said, Tim, you give me like a little hope about the future. So
That's
I
right.
appreciate it.
Yeah,
So
that's parenting.
I want to tell all of you listening that we're at and this may never have been said about Homer, this following sentence. No, seriously. We are at the Bon Jovi stage of the Odyssey. Halfway there.
Yeah, that's it. We are. That's the upside. I mean, that's the positive part of it. The sad part of it is you'd think would be at the end because he comes home. And, you might think the whole journey is just getting back home again. But it is not. Halfway there. And in my translation, the Fitzgerald translation, this chapter is called One More Strange Island, which is a clever title. And that's halfway. And that's Odysseus landing in Ithaca. And we've got half the book yet to go. So what's left, you might wonder.
Yeah.
Well,
So interestingly, Emily Wilson entitles it The Two Tricksters. I think, from a translator point of view, Athena and Odysseus are both lying to each other.
I got you. That's awesome.
So I think she's very upfront about the fact that there's a lot of dramatic posturing in the book, and so she names it.
Good.
So,
and that kind of foreshadows, perfectly the key passage I want to focus on for tonight. And also sort of my lingering question, which I'm going to take in a kind of a different direction, but it's about those two tricksters. And so I'm glad to hear that title. I didn't know she titled it that. Well, Jay, before we jump in, the Fitzgerald translation I said says One More Strange Island. Can you remind us of the setup? So from 10, 11, 12, just in a couple minutes, how do we get here? What was the previous strange islands or something?
Do you want to start with a poem?
Or, as we always do, we could start. That's like eating a meal without saying grace. We almost ate damnation on our heads. Let's go. Let's go to the poem, Jay.
An Island by John Donne ready. That would be great, but I don't have that ready.
No, that's okay.
I wrote this poem. It's from 1954 by a woman named Barbara Howes, and it's from a book called In the Coal Country. And it's a poem about homecoming, and I thought it would make sense, obviously, for book 13.
How do you spell her name? How do you spell her last name?
Howes, Barbara Howes. And it's called The Homecoming. And the one vocab word I only knew from Paradise Lost is cormorant. And it's a carnivorous bird that's really good at diving into the ocean.
I used to stand on the beach in Maine, York Beach, and watch the cormorants and be so jealous. They're lonely birds. They're solitary birds, but they fly like birds and they swim like fish. They have two superpowers that are amazing to watch. Yeah. But I like that.
Paradise Lost turns into one for a little bit. Anyway, this is The Homecoming by Barbara Howes. All the great voyagers return homeward, as on an arc of thought. Home, like a ruby beacon, burns as they crest, wind, scale, wave, soar, air. All the great voyagers return. Though we who wait never have done fearing the piteous accidents, the coral reef sharp as the bones it has betrayed, fate's cormorant unleashed, whose diving's never done. Even the voyager of the mind may fail beneath behemoth's weight. Oh, the world's body carcass blinds all but the boldest, rots the sails, and swamps the voyaging of the mind. But all the great voyagers return home like the hunter, like the hare to its burrow. Below, Earth's axle turns to speed their coming. The following fair winds bless their voyage, blow their safe return.
All right, let's forget book 13. Let's just talk about this poem. Wow.
Yeah, that was just Google. I was looking for poems about homecoming, and I never saw that before, and I'm like, Paul would like this.
I love that. Why is it?
Yeah.
Why is fate a cormorant? Fate's cormorant? Was that the line?
Yeah, it's almost like, it clearly gives a sort of like dangerous arbitrariness to fate, right? If you're a fish just swimming in the ocean and you're attacked by a cormorant, it seems like that's your fate is a sort of arbitrary thing. So fate itself is seen as that sort of creature here, whose diving is never done.
Air, land, and sea, whose diving is never done. Because even if you're not out traveling the wide world, as Odysseus at the end of 13 asks Athena, why did you let my son go? He might have died. And he's worried about Telemachus. Why didn't you just tell him? It's not just that. It's also you can get lost in the mind. The traveler of the mind is best to stay safe at home and not think too many ranging thoughts, lest you get lost. That's a fantastic poem. What was that line? I tried to get it. All the great, as on an arc of thought, all the great travelers come home as on an arc of thought.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that line.
Anyway.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. Thank you for sharing that. Barbara Howes, The Homecoming. Check that out. All right. Well, I think we're ready to begin, and let's look at our layout here. We want to do the obvious and essential from this chapter. So if you're reading this chapter for class, you might comb through this episode for obvious and essential, for subtle points but crucial to the story, and then our key passages and our lingering questions, the things you might land on to think more deeply about this chapter, or at least things that have engaged our mind in this chapter and the broader story. If you're teaching this episode, these are things we think work well in class. We've tried them, and they're things you might focus on as well. So, Jay, do you want to start obvious and essential stuff? I said something about the review, how we got here. Maybe we could just work that into our obvious and essential.
Yeah, I think the context, we haven't, been together for a little bit. So, book 12 ends with a series of super dramatic moments. Odysseus doesn't just, buy a cruise ticket at the end of book 12 and sail peacefully home. There's Scylla and Charybdis and, so all of that happens, at the end of book 12. And immediately in the beginning of book 13, I love the fact, it says in Emily Wilson, I'm sure it's variants in every translation. We very occasionally are reminded of the framed tale nature of this, the Forrest Gump, Princess Bride sort of framed tale that, books 9, 10, 11, and 12 is just Odysseus telling the Phaeacians, his backstory, or the version of the backstory that he wants them to know about.
Yes.
And
right.
So we begin with book 13. They're all held spellbound. It's not like they bought this in a bookstore. This guy is just a guy. They don't know anything. And he tells them about Polyphemus, and he tells them about Circe, and he tells them about traveling to Hades and Odysseus and Scylla and all of this. And any one of those things would blow us away. And he tells them in a sequence. So, and what we know about the Phaeacians is they have no experience in war. They're sort of like, maybe they go to the gym, but they're not warriors. You know what I mean?
Right.
So they play sports, but they've never killed anyone. So added to that is sort of like most of the readership of the Odyssey hasn't killed anyone. And I think that's important. And from what I know, people that I know that are veterans that have read this have been moved extremely differently than people like me. And I acknowledge that. And people like me are like the Phaeacians. Like, this is like listening to science fiction. Like, we've never done this,
Yeah.
I think the beginning of 13 is the shock nature of having heard the Odyssey from Odysseus. And I think that's just an okay thing to say. That's an okay thing. In the book 13 essential plot points is that Odysseus gets gifts from the Phaeacians, which is a typical practice.
Mhm.
Odysseus sleeps on his way home. Odysseus should never be allowed to sleep. It's always bad. He should
Yeah.
get the meds that Elvis got to not sleep. He should not be allowed to sleep.
That's right.
But there's this like interesting insertion. Poseidon, somewhat justifiably, I used to think he was kind of whiny, but I don't know. Poseidon gets upset with Zeus that Odysseus can just sail home as if he didn't dismember Poseidon's kid.
Yeah.
Poseidon,
Yeah.
I'm skipping over. Poseidon ends up destroying Odysseus. He can't kill Odysseus. Odysseus is fated to get home. Fate trumps what the gods want. And that's part
Right.
of the overarching sort of scheme of ancient Greek
Right.
mythology.
The theology of
theology.
ancient Greek gods.
Yeah. Yep. And but Odysseus loses the rest of his guys. So that's the first part of 13. The second part of 13 is him landing at home and he and Athena kind of going back and forth. And basically it ends with Athena disguising Odysseus as a beggar, and there's reasons for that we should get into. And then saying, go visit the swineherd who's like loyal and good, and I'll go get your kid who's being threatened, but I'll take care of him. So it's not just he lands home and he's home, and there is lots of weird stuff in book 13. There's lots of, as you said, we should be surprised that a homecoming story has the hero return home literally halfway through. And it begs the question, there's the battle to get home, but then there's the battle to be home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think Homer's really honest about that. I don't want to constantly say it's just like a soldier. Like, it's not that simple, but I think Homer's aware that there's war struggles, which Odysseus endures in the Iliad. There's the literal, in this context, the literal challenge of returning home, much of which is brought on by himself, frankly.
Yeah. Right.
So if the audience is listening, if a Cyclops is attacking you, don't give him your address and your name. I think that's a practical thing you can learn from the Odyssey.
Yeah. Even if you think you're well away, you're never far enough away. Yeah.
Yeah. You can learn practical information from this poem, life-saving stuff. So I think there's just a surprising number of little nuggets in book 13, and it's not so simple as, okay, he's home now. And
Yeah, not at all. And that's part of what's striking about the chapter, because the straightforward plot stuff, as you say, in a way couldn't be simpler, but Homer does not make it simple. I mean, simply, Odysseus is returned home as promised. Alcinous says, "I'll give you a ride home tomorrow morning. Don't sweat it." He does, with cash, piles of cash. The Phaeacians pay the price. Poseidon does not like it. He complains to Zeus. And I think the reason why you kind of think Poseidon is whiny is because Zeus thinks Poseidon is whiny. He treats him like his whiny younger brother, I think. Yeah. He tells him, well, do what you want. You're a god. And then when Poseidon says, all right, tell you what I want. And Zeus is like, don't do that. I'll tell you how I would do it. This is how I would do it. And then Zeus, takes over. Odysseus is home. Phaeacians pay the price for mastering the seas. Is that something that flies in the face of Poseidon? I'm not sure exactly, but they pay the price. Poseidon takes some revenge, saves face a little bit for Odysseus having made it home richer than he would have made it home had he not lost all the treasure he got from Troy. Yeah. And then finally, it's the Athena scene, as you said, and that's it. But it's not which Athena and Odysseus reunited to scheme together about how to move forward for the next half of the book. Mm-hmm. But there are complications to this thing, and I think those things might fall into the subtle but crucial. So obvious, essential. Book 13, Odysseus is home again. Zeus is in play, Athena's in play, and Telemachus there's a little teaser there for a Telemachus thread coming back to be in play. And that's kind of straightforward, I think, on the obvious essential part.
I have an obvious essential. Do you have one?
No, not really, just that.
Yeah, can I throw something out?
Yeah, please do.
Because it really strikes me. And I've taught Fitzgerald and I've taught Fagles, and it strikes me differently. I looked at the other ones and it's shaped a bit differently. So in the Wilson, it's on like 187, but it says, so Odysseus is home.
Okay.
And he doesn't know where he is.
Yes.
And nearly every modern reader of this poem sees that as a simple metaphor for the complexity of a soldier and the fact that, like, I tell my students, this is different, but
Okay.
when you go to college and you come home again, it's not the same place. Not only might your parents have moved furniture, like I remember, I always joke, my mother made my room a sewing room, and I'm like, oh, okay, I guess that's your room now. But it's just when you're an adult and you come home and you're in your childhood bedroom and like it's your neighborhood friends aren't there maybe, or it's just weird. It's weird being home. Well, war is a whole different level of that. So anyway, here's what I got. Meanwhile, Odysseus, who'd been sleeping in his own native land of Ithaca, woke up, but he did not recognize the place from which he had been absent for so long. Athena had cast a mist upon it, so she could tell him how things stood and make him unrecognizable to his own wife and family and neighbors till he paid the suitors back for how they misbehaved. Spoiler alert.
Right.
I'm going to skip to the next paragraph because this to me is the most moving part. This is
Gotcha. And
Odysseus.
this is in the Fitzgerald translation. This is page 236. If anyone wants to find it.
It isn't just that he traveled to a place he doesn't recognize. It isn't just that he traveled to his home. This is where he's been yearning to go for 20 years. He probably fantasizes about this exact location on a daily basis. Yes. And when he's there, he says this. And I think the baldness and the simplicity of the language is part of its strength. Where am I now? Yeah. This is the words of a refugee in his own homeland. Where am I now? Are those who live here violent and cruel, or are they kind to strangers, folks who fear the gods? Where can I carry all my treasure? Where can I go wandering? If only I had remained there in Phaeacia till I went on to some other mighty king who might have been my friend and helped me home. Where can I leave my things? Not here, for sure. They'll be stolen. Those Phaeacian lords were not so trustworthy. It goes on from there, but I want to point out that if you make an analogy to a contemporary refugee, fine. But before doing that, I would say pay attention to Odysseus himself first. And what I see is he doesn't know where he is. He then speculates about the moral nature of the people who he might meet where he is, and he's scared. And then he imagines what their theology might be, because their theology, their treatment of the gods, is connected to their morality. And then it goes from these big, grandiose ideas to what I think any of us would feel if we were homeless. If I have some things with me, where do I put them? Yeah, it's almost like a child. It's so moving, right? Where can I leave my things? And then there's regret about leaving your former place at all. Oh, I wish I stayed where I was. It's also logical. It isn't orderly. It isn't a natural progression from small to big, conceptual to physical. It's not that. It's arbitrary. It's panicked. Yeah. And it's visceral. It is a visceral response to being scared and frightened of where you are and not knowing how you're going to be treated. And this is the hero of the poem in his homeland, which he's fantasized about. I find that utterly fascinating. And part of what I wonder is, if you've never read this, what Shakespeare would do, and Shakespeare is not Homer, but what Shakespeare would do is he would put this speech in the mind of a character in a soliloquy. He would hear himself say this and evolve as a character as a result. And I don't know if ancient literature does that. So you have Odysseus potentially being able to empathize with other strangers, other refugees, other people who are lost, other people who are scared. And I would encourage readers to bear in mind from book 13 on, does he change because he thinks this? Yeah. Or is this just a fleeting moment? Either could be true.
It's a great point. It's a fantastic point, because Homer doesn't let you off easily. He's home. Just be done with it. Have him look around and be he can kneel down and weep and, thank the gods that he's there and kill an ox to Zeus or whatever. But he doesn't do it. He says, he doesn't know. He doesn't recognize it. And he thinks it's not home. And in a second, he's going to ask. He sees a a shepherd, walking past and says, "Where am I?" And it's Athena appearing like a shepherd. And she says, "Ithaca," but he doesn't believe her. He says, I think you're lying to me. This isn't it. He can't believe it. And I thought it was ironic, the line you read, about speculating about the morality or the theology of the people here. Are these people good people or not? Traveling, going getting outside of his perspective brings a whole new perspective to coming home. It's kind of a line you kind of chuckle at if you've read the book, because you know what? A lot of these people are not good people. These are his people. He's back home, where things are done right, where we're all good, God-fearing people. Well, guess what? We're not. We're actually not. And I don't know if he knew that or not, before he left. I don't know, but he's about to find out. And it's something that he asks. So whatever it means, whatever you make of it, it draws you in. And Homer does this. He just doesn't give you an easy way out, scene after scene. He draws you in, and draws you in, and draws you in. Why is he hiding? Why doesn't Odysseus know where he is? Why is that important? Why does Homer push that on the story, insist upon that? That's worth asking and digging into with your students. And it leads to good places. Kind of, Jay, like you alluded to, it's coming home is not just physically returning to the place, but it's coming back and it's making a home, reasserting a home. Home is where you live in a certain way. And that's just not provided for you or given to you if you're, if you're grown. So, so anyway, it's a great scene. I'm glad you focused on that. On that scene, just the bewilderment that Odysseus has about where he is. Yeah. So that's good. And I kind of had that. I had that in one other thing as sort of my subtle but crucial sort of thing. And I guess it's not so subtle that he doesn't know where he is, but there's a subtlety to it, that I think is important to focus on. The other thing that's subtle that I would put in the subtle but crucial, if we're ready to move on to that, is that kind of what you wanted to say for the obvious? Yeah, so for the obvious and essential, we've got the basic plot where it fits in the broader plot, and then this thing of this obvious point you have to deal with, which is that Odysseus does not recognize home. You've got to make something of that. That gets pushed in your face over and over. The second thing that I think is subtle, or that I'll put down as my subtle, is I just wrote down rolls. Odysseus never takes off the pretense. And even when he's back home, he's trying to figure out where he is. And right after the part that Jay, that you just read to us, Athena takes on a disguise and answers his question. He asks him, looks like a soldier, a young boy, where am I? And Athena answers in these glowing terms about beautiful Ithaca, stranger, you must come from the other end of nowhere, or else you're a great booby having to ask what place this is. Everyone knows Ithaca. So she goes on. And then Odysseus is glad. And he says in line 320, now Lord Odysseus, the long enduring, laughed in his heart, hearing his land described by Pallas Athena, daughter of Zeus, who rules the veering storm winds. And he answered her with ready speech. Not that he told the truth, but just as she did, held back what he knew, weighing within himself at every step what he made up to serve his turn. And then he goes on to tell her where he's from and how he got there and what he did. All of it's bogus. It's all made up. It's all made up crap. And then Athena just laughs and says, wow, you can never turn it off, can you? Even when you're home in your homeland. She's like, come on, it's me. You can tell the truth now. But Odysseus is wearing costumes, or is adopting roles throughout this entire story. And sometimes we've talked about this. Sometimes it comes off as just lying and deception. And I guess it kind of is, but there's a subtlety here that's also compelling, which is the nature of making a home, of being a home, and being. He's going to be heroic. He's going to have to take on roles. He's going to have to adopt. I don't know. I don't want to say persona, because I think it's more than that. He adopts something. I wish I knew Greek. There's got to be something for roles, or some sort of identity that you take on that's not simply a pretense. Right. But it's important that you do. And it's very important. And we're reminded of that because Odysseus invokes what he found out about his good friend Agamemnon when Odysseus went to the underworld, which is, and he just says it blatantly. I'm always, to this day, gray-eyed, or Athena says it, to this always the same detachment. That is why I cannot fail you in your evil fortune, cool-headed, quick, well-spoken as you are. Would not another wandering man enjoy make haste home to his wife and children? Not you, not yet. Before you hear their story, you will have proof, about your wife.
Mhm.
Athena says that, and then a couple pages later, Odysseus, he does say it himself. He says, "Yeah, I could have ended up like Agamemnon,
Yeah.
if I had not taken on this role." So there's something about that, the coming back home, the adopting of the roles. It's rich material to dig into, with students. In this simple chapter, apparently simple
Yeah,
chapter.
and I think something that, the more I read the poem, that it seems to suggest that he's almost the first modern character in that he isn't one person. And I'm going to steal this from the end of Emily Wilson's introduction. She ends
Yeah.
with just a sentence saying the things he is. Odysseus is a migrant, but he's also a political and military leader, strategist, poet, loving husband and father, an adulterer, a homeless person, an athlete, a disabled cripple, a soldier with a traumatic past, a pirate, thief, and liar, a fugitive, a colonial invader, a homeowner, a sailor, a construction worker, a mass murderer, and a war hero. And all of those are objectively in the poem, and all of us can sort of make our own moral judgments of someone like that. But I just don't think he fits into an adjectival box. And I think in that way, he's like a great Shakespearean character. He's like a great Dickensian character, Austinian character.
Yes.
A great modern character, except he's 3,000 years old. Like, he's the first one. Like, I'm reading the Iliad now. I don't see Achilles as a modern character. He's fascinating. I love him. He's not a good guy, but like, I just think the more I read it, Odysseus's brokenness makes him pieces of lots of different things that if you look at him one way, we could easily judge him as evil.
Yes.
And then if you look at him at other times, we could be sympathetic because of the nature of his brokenness. So I don't think it's simple, and I think he operates within a lot of interesting tensions, and I think it's within the tensions that makes him dramatically interesting.
Yes, and they're realistic tensions. These are things that when you push into opposing corners, from mass murderer to weeping over the loss of his men, or weeping over seeing his father or his son for the first time in 20 years, or his deep, deep, deep desire to be recognized and loved by his wife, again, whom he's cheated on. But each of those things, when you press into them, one isn't just simply a nod to try to save some sort of morality or something. They're both pulling just as hard in opposing directions. And so the tension, that metaphor is, you can really, it's taught, and it's real. You don't have to make it up, in other words. It's totally there. And he puts it on. There's a line, Athena, in remarking about his pretenses, you play your part as if it were your own tough skin. Fitzgerald says, translates it. You put it on your part as if it were your own tough skin. And that's the reality of the pretense, I guess, that he wears it so tight fitting, it might as well be real, which, which sort of brings us to that costume, that curious, conspicuous costume that Athena makes for him. Strangely, get this, she's going to dress him up like an old guy who's been gone for 20 years and who might have been bashed about at sea and all beat up and homeless. That's his costume, which also matches a great deal to the previous 12 books of the story. So there's something of that, of the costume she makes for him, that is a little hand in glove. somehow it is a costume. Because he's going to throw it off. People are going to attest to that. But it's also a persona that he wears and might have gotten stuck in. Actually,
Yeah.
might have gotten a hood on his head he never got off.
Yeah, I like that.
But that probably takes us through the subtle and crucial. After those two being done, were there any like key passages you didn't cover in those that you'd like to hit, Jay?
Yeah, I have a subtle. It's actually just a word.
Let's do it.
I find it interesting, and I bring this. This is one of the things I mention a lot when I teach it. The first spoken words of the Odyssey are about 50 or 60 lines into book 1, and it's on Olympus, and Zeus is complaining that mortals blame the gods for their problems. And in the Wilson, he uses the word absurd. How absurd is it that the mortals blame the gods? Yes. I don't think that word has been used since book 1, if I remember correctly, in this translation. Okay. And then suddenly in book 13, Poseidon, complaining about Zeus returning home. And it's around 142. And Zeus says, storm god Zeus exclaimed, earth shaker, Poseidon, how absurd. So here's that word again. The gods do not dishonor you. It would be hard to disrespect an elder so high ranking. If willful humans fail to show respect, then punish them. You always have that power. Do as you wish. So I find it like I'm in the thick of the Iliad right now, which I just read recently that some scholars believe it actually was written by a different person, that the Iliad and the Odyssey are so different. I don't know. That like the Shakespeare authorship controversy, that's not super interesting to me, frankly.
No, me either.
But I find that like the capriciousness of the gods is fascinating, and it would make living in this sort of theological landscape so tenuous because they're like moody adolescents with lots of power. And if you live with adolescents, like relying, your day relying on their moods is sort of a horrifying prospect. So imagine them having the power of Olympian gods. And I think that's what it would be like living inside these poems. Because we have Zeus clearly tipping scales, literal scales in the Iliad, but then complaining in the Odyssey, geez, isn't it silly that the humans blame us? Well, of course they blame you. You're doing active things. Throughout the Iliad, they're literally on the battlefield sometimes. So his shock at facts is interesting to me. And he doesn't like responsibility. Like Zeus is one of those, he doesn't. And here he says to a fellow god, Poseidon, you're not just the humans are being absurd like in book 1. Here he says, look, you're being absurd. You're complaining that Odysseus is making it home. But you know what? Like, is that absurd of Poseidon to complain that this guy who in his eyes is a villain gets to go home? Like, I find Zeus fascinating in his, if you read the New Testament, one of the great qualities, like I think it said in Hebrews, that we have a high priest who like understands our predicaments, right? He lived and breathed and walked around and was betrayed by people and like ate lunch and did things that we do. Had a mother, had a father. So I think that's the revolutionary part of Scripture, is like that's the first time that's been the case, because here, there's a sense that Zeus is utterly and completely disconnected from people, and even is utterly and completely disconnected to why a fellow god would feel things. So it's almost like the gods have their own isolated loyalties and feelings, but they're not capable of feeling things with each other. No. So in that way, they're not as potent as humans. Humans can feel empathy and mutual loyalty. When the gods show loyalty with each other, it's to gain power. I don't have a sense, at least from my amateur readings of the Iliad and the Odyssey, that they're doing it out of some sense of actual moral commitment. I don't feel that way, like at all.
Yeah. No, and you're right about the gods not taking responsibility. Zeus goes on in that passage at the beginning when he says, why do they blame us? And then he goes on to detail why it's their fault. We warned
Yeah.
him. We told him, don't kill the
Yep.
man. Don't take his wife. His son will grow up. And he goes through the whole scenario. But would he listen to us? No. And now look
Yep.
at him. He's dead, Orestes and taking vengeance, and sets up the whole cycle of Agamemnon. So yeah, he is blaming them. I know. I mean, I'm tempted to say something like just extreme and just say, this Greek religion isn't a religion. It's not, in the sense that they don't believe in the gods. It's essentially atheistic. Everything is on the side of the humans. This is humanism. This is deeply, deeply humanistic, because when you push into the gods, they're not there. You can't, they don't identify with you. You don't like them. You don't want to know more about Zeus. You don't care. Fate's more interesting than Zeus. I want to know more about fate. Poseidon, you don't care about them. They add some drama. They're a little bit horrifying, but they're just, well, it's like that series. I thought one of the genius things about that series on Amazon, The Boys, which I think was originally a comic book or something. It's unbelievably good, in the sense that I think it kind of restores what was lost a lot in the Marvel universe of representing superheroes / Greek gods as benign and friendly, kind of palling around, joking people. And in The Boys, the gods are horrifying. They take the superheroes back to their origins, essentially, which is in Greek mythology. And if you thought you might like to get along with your favorite superhero, like Thor or something, it would just be a nightmare, actually. And that's no one wants to hang out with Zeus or Poseidon. It's gross, and their worshipers are fearful. Poseidon's especially deeply, horrifyingly fearful, and so in that sense, it seems like the gods. This isn't really about the gods, and it kind of leads up to my final point, which we'll get there, of two distinctly different ways of reading this reconnoitering between Odysseus and Athena. But I guess for now, to say the weight is just so much, the interest is so much in the humans that I think the gods are just projections of the humans, essentially.
Yeah, it's possible.
Aspects of human personality.
Yeah, and I've referenced this dialogue before, but to me, like, one of the most, and I should just teach it in context with this, but Plato's dialogue, the Euthyphro, just, he exposes the fact that you can't be pious in a world where there's numerous gods who disagree with each other. It's totally philosophically inconsistent. So you're basically, even if you believed in the reality of the gods, which I think they were legally obligated to sort of do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Right. That seemed to be
in a sort of way that, like, you and I have to pay taxes, not like we worship, but it's so, or is that more of the Latin world? I'm not sure. I'm not a classicist, but anyway, I even if you believe in the reality of the gods, you're just so trapped within their inconsistencies. I mean, say what you want about Yahweh or Buddha or Jesus Christ, but at least there's like a figure with a set of teachings, and there's no one in conflict with them. So you can either agree with this way of being inside the world or not. But it isn't like there's Yahweh and Baal and a bunch of people who are like co-equal, living together, fighting and having loyalty. Like, it's not that way.
Right.
And I don't know, part of the interesting thing of this universe is watching these extremely heroic characters, no matter who they are, men, women, old, young, all struggle with that. No one is comfortable. I don't know anybody that's super comfortable with their relationship with the gods.
No. It's all fearful and at best a distant dutiful. The only time I don't feel tension is when someone feels sure they've done the right thing. They've made the libations. They've killed the bulls, and throw in an extra one so you're golden. But it's extremely dutiful.
Always screwed right afterwards, though.
Right, and you never know.
It's like when you're reading Beowulf, I tell students it's like the blues. If you're happy for 2 lines, you're going to be screwed soon. Like in the blues,
it's coming back.
In the blues, if there's a line where it's like, it's sunny outside, but then like your baby leaves you in the next line, like you can't be happy for long. Anglo-Saxon poetry has that in its core. And here it's like, I mean, if you think I am all set, you're going to be totally not all set.
Yeah, that's right. They can't screen it.
You know?
They cannot screen the happiness. Beowulf's 50 years of successful rule is 3 lines in the poem. You know, you don't get to see any of it. You don't,
Yep.
there's no reveling in the happiness. You just know that it happened purportedly. And now we're back to death and destruction and dying and suffering. And yeah, it's good. Well, let's get to the end of this. Lingering questions. What, after these things being said, what lingers? What's left that you think could be provocative for people jumping into this chapter? Do you have something on the tip of your brain, or do you feel like you've kind of gotten everything out?
I'm fascinated by the Athena-Odysseus relationship. I'm fascinated by the fact that they really like each other. They're very similar to each other. It's not a coincidence that the goddess of wisdom is the sort of official sponsor of the most clever Greek man.
No, it is not.
Their brand of cleverness is very slimy. So that's fascinating. And what's fascinating to me is they become slimy with each other.
Yeah.
Like they're lying to each other. And she eventually calls him out like, hey, I'm Athena. And that takes a lot. Like when you read the Iliad and the Odyssey, very rarely do gods come out as themselves to mortals. They're always somebody else or whatever.
Right.
So it must have taken her a lot to be like, you need to see that this is me right now, you know?
Yeah.
Because if he screws up his disguise or sort of exposes his identity early, this ends in book 14 and we go home. I mean, you know. And none of our students would like that, Paul. They want the full 24 books.
No, what would we be reading tonight for homework if that happened?
Don't cheat me. Don't cheat me out of the... But,
I want the whole show.
But I'm fascinated by, as I said earlier, the nature of Odysseus's brokenness.
Yeah.
And the fact that, like, he doesn't trust people, right? I mean, the first time we meet him, very early on in 5, Calypso says, all right, you have permission to go home. You're lying to me. And he does that several times.
Right.
So he's wired to think people are out to get him all the time. And it reminds me
there's
like...
there's some fresh hell they have, in store for him. You know, what trick is this? What are you doing?
I don't think he has mental illness. I think he's been fearing for his life so consistently that he's not going to automatically just embrace whatever thing you say. And it's sort of like if you live in a very scary neighborhood, I'm not saying like vaguely, but like gang warfare is scary.
Right.
You don't walk down the street like if you live in the suburbs. And that's not a racist statement. I lived in a neighborhood like that in grad school, and I learned like your head's on a swivel. It just is.
Yeah.
You know that if you're going to go from here to there, you walk with a group of people. You don't walk alone. Like his whole life has been a dramatic version of that. So he's not going to automatically believe stuff. He's just not.
Right.
And I don't know, like I'm getting more, I still don't think he's a good guy, but I think I'm growing increasingly aware of why he's not a good guy. And it's understandable to me in a way that like, I think I was more judgmental of him years ago.
Yeah. It's difficult. And I think we have gone back and forth on this. I mean, it's not necessarily, openly, but it has throughout the episodes trying to settle on it. Is he a good person? Or not. And I definitely wrestled with that for a long time and still do in some ways.
Yeah.
Although I've come around, to him quite a lot. Not that I could defend that, but just viscerally, that is how he has landed, with me as a strong and almost wholly positive character. Completely, I see him as completely outside even of the moral sphere I'm most familiar with, which is Christian morality. I don't see him inside of that at all. So he wouldn't line up. He
wouldn't see himself there either. I mean, he wouldn't recognize anybody in the New Testament if, they threw themselves at him. So a question I always ask my students, and again, I'm doing Beowulf now. Forget what you think. Like here's the thing. I think we make, and this is a bit of a turn, but this is more of a pedagogy literary theory thing, but I think it's really important. I think, and I can fall into this trap too. I think teachers, including me, can fall into the trap of this is just like us trap. Like, can you see this character being like you? But I think the way to make literature come alive is to not make it autobiographical as a first instinct, and instead to ask, what's unique and specifically interesting about this person? Not necessarily that they're like us. There's no law that says everything has to be like us. We're not just reading
Yeah.
autobiography. How boring would the world be?
Yes.
Instead, to say, like, here's a universe called the Odyssey. Forget what I think a good person is, because that's not really relevant. This is 3,000 years old and not my life. What does this book believe? And there's a really good chance it's a big, complicated book, that it believes certain things here and evolves even in what it believes as a book. I think this book has a more nuanced sense of what it believes in book 24 than it does in book 1. You know? And I think that makes reading a lot more dynamic and fun than this endless quest for seeing yourself. You know, I don't think Gnosticism is a good way to read. I think
again. What is the way to read? I'm sorry, say that again.
I don't think Gnosticism is a good way to read, because if you're interested in seeing yourself in books, you actually just need a mirror, and you don't need books at all, actually.
No, that's right.
Which isn't to say we don't relate, and it isn't to say there aren't moments. I mean, we have all had moments, and I love these moments, where you read a sentence and you say, oh my gosh, I've always thought that, but that's said way back. Like, I love that too. Like, I'm not saying that doesn't exist. But to go autobiographical fishing as a way to read will make you not a reader really fast.
Absolutely not. I mean, absolutely true. I totally agree. Will not. It will keep you from being a reader. And I mean, it's a metaphor in this chapter, which is Odysseus travels and comes back home to find his home strange. If you don't find your home strange, you haven't traveled, you haven't gone anywhere, or you haven't benefited. You haven't benefited from that travel. You've just visited yourself. And you don't go. And Emerson, I'm teaching American Lit. Emerson says this in his essay, Self-Reliance. He says, traveling is essentially a fool's paradise. He says, mainly because it's usually done out of a kind of self-abnegation, where you go and try to find, where you're not trying to find yourself or trying to understand the truth, but just to superficially admire those other cool places. Let's go to Egypt and see the pyramids, or go see the ruins of Greece. Yeah. Go take a selfie with that cool place. And it's so externalized and so empty. So also is the reading yourself into everything, and this into every story, which I've always seen as, I mean, there's lots of different ways to say that. One of them is to politicize the reading. I think there is value in the great effort of trying to remove our times, our concerns, as much as possible from the superficie of the story, to try to get down to the enduring, to the enduring truth. And Emerson says this too, actually. He says, you have access to every truth that any person you hold on a high pedestal ever had. Plato, Aristotle, Jesus, Moses, Buddha. He lists all these different characters. He said, they just don't say what they said, do what they did. Do what they did, and you will find the truths that they found, which is essentially to not quote other people when you're reading, when you're listening, but to quote yourself. Find the truth in the text, and you can do it. It's worth pushing into it. And you're right, Jay. It's really the deepest reason to read, is to find out, is to understand, is to ask that question. Am I like this book, ask, like Odysseus asks, are my people good? Are these people pious? Are these awful people that I'm going to have to, defend myself against?
Right. And even ask the question underneath that, which is, how is this book even defining those things? And I'll tell you, as someone who's reading the Iliad now, they don't define things the same way. And it's the same guy, and it's the Iliad and the Odyssey, which we imagine to be in the same sort of landscape. It is not the same landscape at all. So that's, you could either be frustrated by that sort of inconsistency, or acknowledging the sort of blessing of its complexity, which is what I think is the way to go. And I think Harold Bloom says it. He says, you read because there's no way we can know enough people.
Yeah, right.
So you're just opening yourself up to a wider scope of humans, and they just happen to be in books. And you're saying, oh, that's a really shocking way to define. I never thought of that, or to look at something, or rather than impose, oh, this person has this belief I don't like, I am throwing that away. This person sees relationships differently than I do, throwing that away. Well, then you're just going to be looking in a mirror forever. And I'm not saying we have to agree with everything, but these aren't philosophical tracks. We're entering into like someone's life. It's complicated, as we're seeing with Odysseus.
They're
you know?
representations. They're representations
Yeah.
of truths. They're expressions of, and Bloom would say this as well. They're expressions of evasions of the truth that
Yeah.
that it's instructive to you to hear someone else do, because guess what? You're doing it too, and
Yep.
it's a way of finding and coming back and renaming in order to understand, and comparing and unnaming in order to name. He says things like this, but you have to go through this process. That's very much like a journey of many violent and unsettling stops of great loss, in order to find and to gain and to get back. And it never ends. It never stops until you're dead. It just doesn't. Except for in book 24 by magic, possibly. But it's never, it's never over. But I think that's, to me, this is the sort of lingering question is the way to read this scene. And I have brought this up in the past, but it's intense here. And my final comments here are on page 243 of the Fitzgerald translation, which is the last page of the chapter, in which Athena says, I'm going to put you in this costume, this old man costume, and then I got to go. I'm going to take off to the land of Sparta to tell your son Telemachus to pack his bag and start heading home again, because it's time to come back. And Odysseus answers and says, why not tell him, knowing my whole history as you did? Must he traverse the barren sea, he too, and live in pain, while others feed on what is his? What's Athena going to say to that? He says, why didn't you just tell him? Why did you send him to find out? You know my whole story. Why didn't you just tell him? No need for anguish on that lad's account. I sent him off myself to make his name in foreign parts. No hardship in the bargain, taking his ease in Menelaus's mansion. Yeah, but, he could have died, is the truth. This sort of scene, and these are intense scenes, which you point out, it's not common for a god to completely unveil themselves. I think there's something kind of significant happening here in the significant moment of Odysseus landing back in his homeland. And I think there's two great ways to read this with students. There's many lingering essay prompts in here. One way is to read it where Athena is a god who comes and visits, almost a Harry Potter sort of magic kind of way of reading it. And Athena is a character. But another way to read it is to ask yourself and ask students, what is actually going on here? Is this a moment of self-counsel? Is this a moment of Odysseus consulting, speaking of Emerson, consulting his genius, consulting his inner daemon, his inner light, his consciousness, to find out what's going on? And is he turning things over in his head? And you can read it that way. He comes to see the island as home after he consults with Athena, which, Jay, as you pointed out, is conspicuously very much like his own spirit. They are two spirits of a kind. They are cleverness, wisdom in crafty warfare, in constructing winning battles. They're both the same in that way. And so it's I think it's interesting to read. You can read the entire Odyssey that way. Mm-hmm. But this scene especially, now that he's back at home, is he consulting carefulness with his intelligence, with his soul, with his spirit, to find out what the next move is, what's going forward. And I think he learns from, he can answer himself on this, Athena, why send the boy? Why is the boy out, looking for me? Because these things can't be told. That's why Athena can't tell him. That's not how you learn. That's not how we understand. In other words, meaningful knowledge is not Googleable. It can't be looked up. It's of no value. It's of no value that way. It's not. Anything that you can look up as a fact is just a fact. But that's not what he's looking. That's not what he's looking for. He's looking for understanding. He's looking for knowledge. And you're changed. You're completely changed in the process of knowing, of coming to know. And that's part of knowing. It's being and knowing are intimately related. And you're not this thing over here operating a computer knowing. It absolutely does not work that way. You do come to know something by doing that, but it's not the thing you're looking for.
Yeah, and I think
So
that's. I'm
yeah,
sorry to go on and on. I just want to dovetail off that if I could. That
yes, please.
I think when you're holding a book that's a certain length and you're halfway through, we intellectually know that we're halfway through a story. The people don't hold the book they're in. So
Right.
Odysseus, actually, as smart as he is,
Yeah.
doesn't know doesn't know. I don't think he knows the danger of the situation that he's in. I don't think he knows the full extent of it.
No.
And Athena does. And it's a really interesting example of, he accuses her of, once he finds out that it's her, he basically says, "You've done nothing for me. You have not taken
Yes.
care of
That's
me."
right. That's right.
And in the meantime, she's basically disguising him. There's a sense that he would have just gone in as Odysseus and been like, "All right," kind of like Castaway, like, "I'm back, woohoo!" Except his wife didn't, get married. So anyway,
Right.
and he's not Tom Hanks. But other than those two details,
Right.
Odysseus wouldn't have been so close to a volleyball. I think he would have gotten more. Anyway, that's a separate thing.
Yeah, I'm
But
saying Athena is basically the volleyball, like that's
that's right. Again, another thing that's never been said. We're breaking significant ground here. Athena as Wilson the volleyball. That's the the podcast has a title now.
that
But
it has a title, yes.
yeah, Athena
Um,
as Wilson. No, I just think, again, it's Odysseus, as smart as he is almost childlike in his lack of awareness. Right now, he's a scared
yeah.
person. He's
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
he's very frightened now,
Yeah.
and there's trickery, and they're lying to each other, and he's a scared, almost like a scared kid who doesn't know where he is, and he doesn't know
Yeah.
how he's going to be treated. And it's fascinating to see him, a war hero who's gone through what he's gone through, when he's home, where you'd feel like this is where he would feel most secure. He's actually never been more scared than this in some way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And
that
it's
to me is a whole separate, like, what might
yeah.
Homer be telling us by making that the case? Like, that's really interesting. I don't know what to do with that.
I know there's lots to do with it. I don't know either, but the least thing is that it's compelling. He's a real person.
Yeah.
He's a
Yes.
real person. And
1000%.
how he weaves that together where you have a respectable hero who also is frightened. I don't know where to put my stuff, like a homeless person looking for a locker,
Right.
and because someone might take it and then I won't have my stuff anymore. It's pathetic. And yet, as you said before, he's our hero. He's going to clean house. He's the one we've been following and we're interested in, but he's real. He's alive to every moment. And it changes me. I learned a new word in looking into this into this chapter this week. Percipience, which is an English word. Percipience, related to perception, has a great definition: knowledge gained from the process of learning. Knowledge gained, percipience,
As opposed to from the knowledge of experience.
I guess it's the same. The knowledge gained from the process, the experience of learning something.
Oh, okay.
Knowledge, yeah, it's kind of, but it's more than knowledge. I think it's like capacity.
Okay.
Percipience is the capacity you've added in the process of taking on learning how to do X or something. And I thought of this. I was thinking of this scene in this chapter, and that this vulnerability that Odysseus has. That it's a process of growing and learning through finding out how to store his stuff, through finding out how to find out what's going on the island, through finding out how not to become like Agamemnon. And when he comes out the other side, he's going to be this great character. So I think some of that leads us along in the story as readers, as paying customers here in this show, keeps us wanting to, to stay in our seats.
Yeah, that's good. I like that.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, all right, man, that's a ton. In this chapter, I don't know. It's almost like a throwaway chapter in a way. Like there's not a lot of plot here, but
but there is. Like, there's no throwaway chapters in this book.
It's just
even
not, is there?
Even the laundry chapter wasn't a throwaway chapter.
No. Golly. It's
Which
hard
my
to find.
my Nana would be proud of us.
She went through the Great Depression anyway, so you just don't throw stuff away.
He took laundry very seriously.
Oh yeah, right. Talking about the laundry part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, this was good, Paul. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, Jay, thank you too. Thank you for your insights, and it's so good to have that the Iliad cooking in the background. Now that you're working through the Emily Wilson Iliad, and maybe we'll have some something to say about that too. All right, book 13, boom, book it. It's in the bag, and now we can move on 14, 15, and we'll try to just keep rolling. Thanks for watching with us, for going through this, for combing through these episodes for things that you can use in your classroom as a teacher or as a student. If you've liked it, subscribe, leave a comment. We'd love to interact with you and hear what you are doing in your classrooms with great books like the Odyssey. All right, Jay. See you next time.
See you, Paul.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. See ya.